Hey guys, welcome back to the True North podcast. My name is James McKinnon. I've got Ryan Moore with me, and we have a couple special guests, Mike Decker and Brock Kendrick, that are going to join us this week. How you doing, guys?
Man, I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Thanks for being
Really
here.
good. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so this past weekend, the four of us got to experience Basecamp together. It was our first Basecamp of 2025. Yeah. Mike was our camp director for only like the 30th time that he's done that. Yeah. Brock, actually, this was your first time to lead our admin team. Yeah. And then Ryan and I kind of were in the background, just hanging out and experiencing the weekend. And so it was an incredible weekend with lots of breakthrough. We had 6 salvations.
Yeah, gosh.
9 baptisms out of, I think there ended up being 56 guys total that came. And so just an incredible weekend. What stood out for you guys about this weekend?
Man, I think there were a lot of things, James. But I think the one that probably really just sets deep in my heart is the fact that the freedom that men got out of that camp. As we're sitting there and I'm just thinking back through some conversations and men talking out loud about things, you heard a lot of details like, no one else knows this.
Yeah.
I've never shared this with anyone else.
Yeah.
And for a man to step up into that and just have that act of obedience to follow God's prompting to do it is really special. Yeah. Because, the enemy has this way of making sure that things are held into the dark. And if I bring it to the light, then I'm going to be seen different. I'm going to be looked at different, even with spouses or family members, right? And so when they have an opportunity to step in and have that courage to bring it to the light, like no longer does the enemy hold them in bondage.
Yeah.
Right. And then just our ability as a team, just to surround them and encourage them that hey, you could have these thoughts, you could be feeling these things, but remember you're a warrior and you know how to come against that with not just weapons, but you know how to come against that with what the Father's given you. So that was big for me, just seeing that freedom piece.
Yeah, because it's interesting, like how I think we kind of, when you're in True North culture for so long, like you can kind of take for granted how big of a deal that is because I think we can really pride ourselves on being authentic and transparent. I mean, obviously there's layers to that, but the stuff that these guys were coming out with were just things that were obviously not at the back of their mind, like at the front of their mind, that they still were not releasing control of. And
it was some heavy stuff too.
Yeah.
I think for me, this is the first camp that I've been to. When I got to Sunday, I wasn't so ready to go home by about 10, 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
I was sad when I left. And I didn't know what it was, but like pulled out of there at 2 o'clock and like I was just sad. You know what I mean?
You just wanted to stay.
Yeah, I just wanted to stay. And I got home and I told my wife, I said, I don't want this to come off sounding bad. Like, I'm glad to see you, but I'm sad.
Yeah.
I'm sad I left. Like, it was just that kind of a group. And I don't know if it was because it was a smaller group, because the last several I've been to, there were 90 to 100 people plus. And it was like this one was a smaller group. It was a little more intimate. And I don't know, everybody just kind of meshed really well.
Yeah. Yeah, and you had a group of guys that came with you too.
Yeah, we had 8 of them,
which is awesome. We'll dig into that in a minute here. I'd love to hear some stories about their experience.
All right.
Obviously, we don't have to talk about the individuals, but just like an overall, like what we saw happen. But Brock, for you, this was your first time actually leading in the admin role. Before you'd shadowed in the fall of last year. But this time leading, is there anything you can point like that was different for you that you felt, and any experience that changed for you?
Yeah, it was just the willingness of everybody to help. Like I had Carlton and Chance, and every time I turned my head, it was done.
Yeah.
And so I think at one point on Saturday, I said, can you guys let me do something? And so I just the willingness, I think when you get in this culture and you're in it for a while, you just want to help. You know what I mean? And whatever that looks like, whether it's talking to these men or, getting snacks ready or or setting stuff up behind the scenes. You just want to help. And I think
Yeah.
just those two, I mean, I didn't have to do anything.
Yeah.
I showed them the very first day, and every time I turned my head, I was like, can you guys stop?
That's a good problem to
It
have,
is,
man.
because I'm one of those ones, I have a hard time feeling like I need to feel like I'm doing something,
Yeah.
you know, and but it helped me because I did have so many guys there. And so it kind of helped me. Like, I had several conversations with them about what was going on.
Yeah.
And so it kind of allowed me to do that. But
That's good.
No, and I think like as a director of a camp, like man, you want to have the A team in there. And I've never not had an A team.
Yeah.
Everyone does things differently, right? And so like having someone like Brock that truly understands the message, right? And understands that it's the man that we want to impact, right? And being that vessel that God can work in and through is so important. And then for him to have people show up, right? Like 8 guys, that's a big deal. And man, you know, we may have guys that bring 1 or 2, but not 8. So first of all, man, congratulations. I think it shows your heart and willingness to just serve those people that you love.
I appreciate that.
And you want them to be introduced to a message that has completely changed who you are, right?
Yeah.
And so it's cool how God always orchestrates, right? So although you felt every time I turned around, things were done and finished, the other cool side of that is, you know, I watched you sit there and pray over your men. I watched you walk up behind them and like stand in the gap for them in tough moments. And by having the support that you needed and people that were shadowing you in those roles, it allowed you to step into where God needed you to be.
Yeah.
And so that was really cool for me to
No
see.
kidding. Yeah. Ryan, so for you, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but you said something at the beginning of camp. You talked about kind of your expectations.
Yeah.
And I think this would be very valuable for our listeners to hear, honestly, like your experience in that, because you talked about in the past, like you go in with no expectations. That's always been the healthy thing for you to do.
Right.
And it's helped you.
Yeah.
But this weekend, you declared on Thursday, like, hey, I'm expecting God to come through on something.
right.
Yeah.
But then Monday, we're decompressing, talking about how your weekend was, and you're like, man, I'm not sure. Can you talk about that a little bit? And
Yeah, I think I had in the past, you know, so many breakthroughs in that environment of camp and the quiet time and just the message, and then being around these guys, and God speaks so many times, even through conversations.
Yeah.
And he certainly did that this weekend. But I think in the past, I had showed up to camp expecting another big breakthrough, right? And been disappointed at the end of it. And so this time I was kind of leery, but I really felt like God had something more that he either wanted to reveal to me or speak into me or gifting, or I didn't really know what, but I was like anticipating something great.
Yeah.
And really there was no huge breakthrough. And there wasn't really anything on my mind that I was hoping for specifically, but I just feel like God had something for me, you know? And so processing that, and even more today, praying through it and seeing he's reminding me of different conversations that I've had in which he clearly spoke through me as far as like not knowing these guys from Adam, you know, but giving them exactly what they need based on their feedback.
Yeah.
Right. And it's just such a unique position to be in when God's just downloading stuff to you and you just say a simple thing and it's like something clicks in a man and they light up or they get emotional or whatever. So that's been good for me to recall over the weekend. But come Monday, and it's like, man, I don't know. But I think it's such a journey, this whole process. And I think that I can look at other men and see progress or see huge breakthroughs or giftings or whatever. And comparison is a thief of joy, you know? And I think it's a good place to be in. Like, I think my heart is right where it's supposed to be. I should be anticipating more from God because there's always more.
Yeah.
There's more for me to work on. There's more healing to be had. And it requires the work to lean in,
Mhm.
ask for it, and invite him in. But I also can't be tied to the outcome, which has been a theme for years
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot be tied to the result of my work and in my inviting and in my quiet time.
Mhm.
Right.
That's exactly what happened to me on Saturday
Yeah.
when I like the whole weekend, the whole week leading up, like my face kept getting flushed and like I was getting nervous and
Mhm.
like my hands were shaking and I just felt like over anxious.
Yeah.
And I got there and just trying to get all those people to camp at the same time has been like a year in the making. And they've all shunned me
Yeah.
on numerous occasions.
Yeah.
Like, this is
Yeah.
stupid. I'm not going to do something like this. This isn't for me.
And so, what was your strategy?
I went over their head and I called their wives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
so,
Yeah.
I love it.
so it worked, you know?
Yeah, it did.
And so, these are people I've had relationships for a long time, and many of them I've known their wives for a long time. So I just called their wives.
Yeah.
I'm like, look, hey, this is.
We don't necessarily condone calling wives.
Hey, don't try
but,
this at home.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's all for the
But-
glory of God, right?
But I did. And in one of them, he calls me immediately and he says, "You called my wife." I said, "Yeah, you're doing right. I did. You've been dodging me for 8 months. You called my wife." I said, "Yes. You're going to say that again." He said, "All right, that's okay. I needed to go anyway. All right. Thanks for doing that."
Yeah.
I was like,
Mhm.
"All right." So we get there and like, I just have put so much pressure on myself. And of course I'm having to respond right off the bat on Friday morning.
Yeah.
And that's pressure.
Yeah.
And then Saturday rolls around and I'm just like, my face keeps getting red and it's tingling and I'm something's going on. And I'm sitting up there with Mike and Ryan and I just leaned over to Mike and I was like, dude, I'm taking on way too much.
Mhm.
Like, I'm taking on so much pressure, like their experience, that it's going to go exactly how mine went, and it's eating me up. And so, of course, you eventually kind of heard us, and you jumped in, and you guys were both kind of feeding into me and calmed me down a little bit. And I had some agreements I need to break. It just jumped right back into everything's on me, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
As we men tend to do.
Yeah.
I got 8 guys here. It's on me. Like, if this doesn't change their life, nothing's going to.
Yeah.
And it was a really foolish thing to do, because I'm not that powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we get done doing what we're doing. And I look up and I notice you leave, Ryan. And I'm still talking to him. And I get done wiping my eyes, calming down. And I turn around and you're behind the booth with one of my guys who was the last one I thought was going to break.
Yeah.
And he hit a moment and you were talking him through it. And it was just validation for me. Like, you don't have to do anything. You just have to
Yeah.
get him here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
I think I turned around and told you that.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things from this camp that I think I probably saw more of, and I've done a few camps, right? So it really stuck out, but the power of God using more than one man.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I think what you're describing was Ryan's over there talking to him and I'm having a conversation with you, and literally Ryan kind of gets the guy's story and I walk up and God just gives me some words to share with him and I share it with him. And you could see it was like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't even know kind of what was going on. And then Ryan later was like, hey, it's really, really awesome that you weren't involved from the get, because actually exactly what you said was the story that he just shared with me. And so like God's over here doing work, confirmation, right?
Yeah.
And I think even for you, Brock, like that's one of those things where when we take on that responsibility, it can shift an outcome, right? But I love it that you were able to identify it, right? Because the Brock that I knew from past camps would have just held that in, right? And wouldn't have stepped into that
Bulldog
agreement.
it.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I'd try to overpower it.
Yeah. And you surrendered,
Yeah.
gave it back. And then God confirmed that was the right step.
Mhm.
So
So
was really
what do you
cool.
guys think? And Mike, I'm curious for you because you've done this so many times. And I think this question is relevant for people, whether you're going to a retreat or maybe it's just something in your normal life
Mhm.
so we step in, we tell people to not have expectations,
Yep.
right? And to release outcomes. But
Yeah.
then there is also, like you touched on, like we're called to be like children in our
Mhm.
faith.
Mhm.
And like that means we're expecting this to be the most awesome weekend ever.
Yeah.
So how do we healthily balance those things? You have any experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, me personally, like I'm the type of guy in the past, like the spotlight was important because it fed my addiction, right? It was about me and what I was building. And so although I could use it for God's kingdom, I could use it for myself also. And so, in the past I would get to a camp and feel like I had to get on stage and deliver something instead of being a resource that something gets delivered through. And so I think back to your question of, a lot of guys walk in with the unknown. And I think we do a really good job of making sure that we don't like share too much, but we share enough. But from the stage, if you're asking the question as a director of camp, I think you really have to seat moments with men from the beginning, right? Because everyone's questioning and asking these questions in their mind. They're not verbalizing it out loud. And so as a director of a camp, you got to make sure that you answer those questions before they have to ask, right?
Yeah.
So the way that we lead into camp and the way that we engage with those guys, the message that's delivered is, hey, you're not alone, right?
Yeah.
You're not the only one having these thoughts. And then making certain that with that, we're getting those guys to come together as a brotherhood, right? Because if I'm doing it by myself, which is most men as they walk into a camp, like life is experienced alone, right? And so when they come into a camp and Brock brings 8 guys, that's why it was so important for him to bring a family of men together, because now those men leave, they have a story that they can be a part of that God called them up into, and they're not alone once they leave a camp. But when men come in, they're not part of a larger story. They're part of this really small story that God hasn't been invited into because they don't know better, right? And so from the stage, like it is very important, and God has told me, like, I need these guys to be one. I need them to come and lock arms with one another and agree out loud that, like, I got your back. I got your back. I'm going to protect you throughout this camp, and make certain that when I see things happen, whether it's nodding off or disengagement or not showing up to your chair, like, I'm going to be accountable for that because I want to lock arms with you. And so, but that happens because now they feel like they're not alone, right? And so those unmet expectations, I think where they get met is through community, and where they get met more importantly is the time they spend with their father. But it's really cool because everybody's experience, Brock's is different than mine the first time. Ryan, yours was different. James, yours was different. But the message is the same. It's just, it's the craziest stuff. It's like when you respond and a guy comes up to you and repeats what he got, and you're like, yeah, bud, I mean, not sure I said that, but like God uses it to kind of speak the words that man needs. And so, but yeah, I mean, I think expectations on the father are healthy, right? But I think expectations on man are very unhealthy. So
do you have experience, Mike? I know that we've got a lot of camps that this comes into practice. And I know Eldridge actually teaches us to do this, of kind of praying for advanced words on the camp. And what you were talking about just now is like discernment of what these guys need to hear to make them feel comfortable and open to the experience. But then there's also the level of, like, we know what's coming against you. Like, there's specific warfare that is, like, it's not a blanket, like, okay, in 2025, like, division is coming against all of our base camps. It's like, no, we're praying the week of all the way up until, like, our staff meets on the day of camp, and we're listening to what's coming against these guys. And do you have any cool experiences with that?
Oh man, camp after camp, everything's different. This camp, what I really think God was preparing a way for was really true sonship. And then I had a lot of just thoughts of this, right? Like, there was a message that there's men that are going to come that have been more than once, and you really need to get them to understand that I have something for them. And even though you may have brought another man, like, this is for you, right? There's been camps where he clearly told me, you'll know it by its fruit. Like, that is the message that I want these men to receive this weekend. Like, you'll know it by its fruit. Like, a lot of you guys are doing things and experiencing these things, but you're not going to the Father first, and you're not seeing fruit from it. So you need to look at, the lens needs to be, you'll know it by its fruit. Man, camps have been porn addiction and sexual addiction and broken marriages, right?
Suicide.
Yeah. I mean, I think 4 camps ago, suicide was like going into it. We felt like God was really saying, hey, you need to be specific in prayer over this. And we were in this area and felt like there were some heavy spirits that were trying to form some authority on our camp. And so we had to arm ourselves and pray against that and diminish those spirits. And then, no lie, like I bet it was 13 to 15 guys, if not more than that, that literally said out loud, I almost took my life.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The September one was the theme seemed to be molestation. I counted, that was the one we had over 100 people. And when the first guy opened up at the fire, it opened everything up. And I was back there with Trey and I was counting, and it began to make us both physically sick. Like we were crying and we were just upset. There was 27 is when I quit counting. So 27 guys after the first one, and a couple of guys walked off.
Yeah.
Back in, that was when we had the fire back behind the auditorium there.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to just how beautiful God orchestrates even the guys that show up to camp, and then also the responders that share the portion of their story that resonates with those in the crowd. And because it does seem like there's a theme.
Will you explain what a responder is real quick?
Yeah, so we're mainly video sessions, right, from John Eldridge and his team, but then we have responders get up and share a portion of their story. These are local guys, often those that are on staff, that share kind of what God has done in that aspect, whether it's a wounding or sonship or it's applicable to that particular session and what we're talking about.
Yeah, and these guys are on staff for camp, not necessarily work for True North.
Yeah.
So like,
right, yeah. So they're volunteer
guys,
staff. Yeah, they're regular dudes.
Well, because we're the only staff and we don't do anything. So
right, we know. We're just.
Didn't you just say that about James last week?
30 plus camps, I can tell you. Yeah, So James looks pretty, and
the best leaders
that's right.
delegate.
I like it. I agree, brother.
We're everybody's cheerleaders, but it's so cool to see that either through one of the responders' stories, it resonates with the crowd, and then especially like throughout the weekend, as these guys are getting connected, sharing their vulnerabilities, there seems to be like whenever they hear another guy suffering from thoughts of suicide, then it gives them courage to also come forward with their own stuff. And so it's pretty crazy, whether it's, molestation or suicide or porn addiction or alcohol addiction or whatever it is.
Attraction.
And that's one of the things I tried to say when I was responding this weekend was like, what got me, almost 2 years ago was that it took God sending someone into my life, another man that was my equal, who I thought was just as tough, just as successful, just as much of a man's man as I was. It took God sending him into my life and saying, this is what I've been doing for the last month.
Yeah.
I'm embarrassed. I'm disgusted. I've hurt my wife, and it took him saying that for me to go, wow, I've been a porn addict for 8 years.
Yeah.
Your sin's not any worse than mine.
Yeah.
It's just not. And it took me hearing that from him and saying, hey, like, that was really a crappy thing that you did. Not quite sure I used crappy, but it was a really crappy thing that you did. But what you just told me, like, I liked you before, but I love you now.
Yeah.
Like I do.
Yeah,
like we're tied. And so I think for men to just hear someone get up there and just in weakness, come in weakness. Because it takes a lot of weakness.
The biggest lie the enemy uses is that we're on our own.
Yeah.
Our story is so unique, nobody can relate. And so when you share those vulnerabilities, it really opens yourself up. Not only does it, like you were talking about in the very beginning, Mike, bringing that stuff into the light is the key.
Yeah.
Because if you're just hanging on to that one thing, guarantee that's the thing holding you back.
Oh, it eats you up too.
Yeah. It's keeping a ceiling on your experience, whatever God has for you, whether that's joy or, being the father, being the husband, being the man that you're supposed to be. it's holding you back.
Yeah, that's a huge part of just my story and my calling is when I went to my first base camp, I was like the third person to go at the fire, right? Wrote my stuff down, set it, threw it in the fire. And the whole weekend, I had been looking at all these men. There was like 130 guys. And my assumptions about a majority of these men is like they've got it all figured out.
Oh, yeah.
They've got the house, they've got the wife, they lead their families well, all these things, and they carry themselves like that. And then you're standing there listening to what they believe about themselves or what they've made agreement to. 100 guys in a row.
Yeah.
Dude, it broke me. Like it wrecked my heart. I literally wept that whole time, and none of it had anything to do with me.
Yep.
It was all like, what's happening here?
Right.
Hold up.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, guess what I do at church on the weekends? I look around and think the exact same things. That guy's got it together. He's leading his family. Like, what influence do I need to have in their lives? They've got it figured out. Until that moment of hearing that from these guys, I'm realizing, oh, like, no, this is happening to every man in our churches, in our neighborhoods, in our, like, hold up, like, men need to know the truth.
Yeah. And I think for our listeners, if you're if you're a woman and you're listening to our podcast and you followed us for a long time, like what James just said, right? Like you may look at your husband and see this really strong individual and you don't understand why these things happen that cause conflict or strife or whatever it is. And I think what it all goes back to and what you're explaining, James, is it's their story, right? Like, man, for my wife to know my story, like, and to know all of the intricacies about me and the areas that, man, I don't get right and I struggle with, but the areas that I feel like God is calling me into, like as a spouse, and knowing that, man, this guy doesn't have it all together, right? And he's probably doing a really good job of posing. And if he's being a complete opposite of that, he's still doing a really good job of posing, right? And so when you ask me clearly what this camp was, God told me, and it was just through what you asked me to share on, which was sonship. So what he told me is when the son is ready, the father will appear.
Yeah.
And that was the message that he gave me for this camp. And, I said it from the stage as soon as I was up there. I was talking about it all weekend. In like that message of sonship, again, like is just so strong. But like when we're ready to receive what God has for us, we don't have to wait on his timing. Yeah. It's all on us, and it takes a story like Brock's where a man comes to him that like, man, I'm your friend, but holy smokes. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, like now there's an invitation to something, which is I can be vulnerable because you were vulnerable, right? And so, man, even for guys, if you're out there and you're struggling and you're unsure, like, man, I want to tell someone this or I want to do this. You can email these guys at True North, and I promise you these two guys or one of our guys that are what I would call shadow partners or whatever you want to call it, but men that really are involved in True North, like we will pick the phone up and we will have a conversation with you.
Man, Mike, tell the story of, so a couple weeks ago, I said, hey, Mike, I think you should respond to sonship.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So tell the story of how that played out.
Usually mine's poser or beauty, right? And those two things I'm really confident with because, man, I still to this day have areas where I have to work in and through that, right? But God has really done a lot of healing in those areas. But when you asked me to share on sonship, in the full alignment with who I am in Christ, the answer was yes. But like me individually, I was like, woo, like that's a big ask, James. And I immediately responded like, okay. But then there was this, I started to grab a hold of all these reasons to not do it. And man, I'm working through it and trying to figure out what does God want me to do? And Jamie knew that this is, if you're married, I promise you, your wife knows you really well. Yeah. And she literally is like, hey, I think this is really important for you. And it's going to bring some freedom. And so I didn't know what to talk about or how to talk about it. And as I digested it, and even from stage, it was really hard to say this, but I knew God the Father, but I'm not sure I know God as the Father. And even right now, there's been a ton of healing from me saying that out loud to my band of brothers and in a community that I trust.
Mm-hmm.
But no, to say that it was easy is not true, right? I had to really seek. I mean, I was pretty candid. I'm like, man, me and Jesus are homies. Like, we got a deep relationship. I walk with him. I ask him questions. I move with him. And the Holy Spirit prompts me in so many ways that I have very confidence to know what that prompting is. And, you know, if it's like, hey, we need to do this, or go pray for this, or step into this and be this at this moment, like I activate on that in such a strong way. And, but man, like, you know, when I think about it, it still gets me emotional because I looked at God, the Father, as my father on this earth. And man, there's a lot of hurt in that. Just because of my expectations and what I wanted and my desires as a son. And I really thought, this is impossible. No one can fill that void, right? No one can come in there and just basically heal those areas of brokenness, right? I mean, and that's why throughout my young age, I am young. I'm a grandpa though, so I guess that makes me a little older. But man, when I'd have older guys want to mentor me or speak into my life, I really push back against it. But if I'm hanging out with you guys, I feel confident, right? Because I don't feel like there's this father role.
Yeah. And you said you could be mentored by peers or
absolutely.
like the same age.
Yeah.
Just,
no problems.
just it was an age thing for you.
Yeah, it was an age thing. If they look like a father figure to me, I shut that down so fast.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart because there was a lot of men that wanted to be a part of my life. And I think I had a lot to give to them. Yeah. Right. No. And I think there was a lot of guys that wanted to just speak into me because I think they saw things in me. And unfortunately, my route was, well, I'll do it. You know, I got this. And I had a lot of Jesus and a lot of Holy Spirit, but like, man, what could have been if I had the father relationship that's intended to be? And so, man, when the son is ready, the father will appear. And so I spent time with that and felt like God was really speaking into my life. And, on the way to camp, like God told me to call my dad, and our relationship is still, you know, it's not what I want it to be. And that's okay. But what he told me is, you know, you need to apologize for some things. And the thing that he asked
That's
me
what
really,
God the Father told you.
God the Father, right? I think it was probably Jesus, Holy Spirit, but I'm still there. It was God the Father. But I felt like he was asking me to call him and just say, man, I put a lot of pressure on you. And, you know, because my story, my dad got out of prison, man, and I just felt like when I would visit him, like I would hear this gospel man and he would speak these things and like it felt so good. And then when he got out, I was like, this is it, man, we're going to have this. And we did for a short period of time. And then things got, you know, unbalanced. And so there it goes again, right? Like can't count on that. You know, you did 8 years in a prison and wanted to have a deep relationship. And now here we are, you know, same story, right? Same outcome. But when I called him, it was like, man, I had to apologize. I put a lot of pressure on him to be that. When really it probably should have started as, hey, let's figure out how we both can be sons, right? Let's figure out how we both can be sons. And then as God is our father and we're his sons, I think he's going to call us together in some adventure to be father and son together. So there was a lot of cool things from that. But yeah, man, that was it.
That's awesome.
But there was a lot of, I'm getting ready to say this. And then, you know, there was fear and there was this stuff, but God was like, I got you.
Yeah.
You know?
So Mike texted me last like Wednesday and was like, dude, like God hadn't downloaded anything to me yet for this message. And honestly, guys, like I think I just had a smile come on my face of like, oh, good. It's going to be really good then.
Yeah.
Because it's not your preparation or like your like own will. Like God's going to have to come through for you to bring a message that's going to actually be real and impact you and the people listening. And that's what happened.
That was part of my nerves, honestly.
Yeah. So Brock, you responded as well. This was your second time to respond and you responded to Poser. And so how was that for you?
You kind of didn't have it together either.
No, I didn't.
Coming into
Because
camp,
last time when I did Wound, I went in detail and I sent you everything and I'm like, oh, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And then about a week before I was like, that feels scripted. And so I thought, man, I'm not going to make this a Hollywood production. This is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I scrapped it all a week before. And I was like, hopefully I'm going to get up there and my mouth's going to open. And so it did,
Yeah.
thankfully, and it went okay. And then this time I was like, you know what? They clearly aren't asking me to write out, so I'm not going to go there.
Mhm.
I'm just going to show up, and
good.
whatever God tells me to say, I'm going to say. And Thursday night comes around, and I didn't realize it was the first session
On
Friday morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That panicked me a little bit
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I thought, okay, wounds number 4. I know that. And then I get to flipping through there, I'm like, crap.
Mhm.
I don't have as much time as I thought.
Yeah.
And then the next thing I know, it's 1:00 in the morning, and I'm up talking to Clem, and I'm thinking, I don't have a download. Mike calls it a download.
Yeah.
I don't have my download yet. I'm panicked.
Mhm.
And Clem starts talking about something about how he just feels like his wife kind of called him out. He just feels like he can't slow down.
Mhm.
She wants to slow down, and she wants to not do so much, and he just still has that voice that just tells him go, go, go.
Mhm.
And I was like, like I know that voice.
Mhm.
I just kicked him to the curb
Yeah.
maybe a year ago.
Yeah.
It's nice. And so I'm telling him how beautiful it is to live life without that voice. And he says, why do you think that is? And so we start talking, and I said, I start going into the story about this identity I got in high school of Superman.
Mhm.
And like I was rooted in that identity so much so that I wore the shirt. So stupid. I wore this Superman shirt, and I made sure it was
So
as tight
good.
as could be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I know it
Smooth.
I don't know anyone like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well, I was just gonna say, I don't know how they found someone with a better pose, but
but I did.
Touche.
High five. I did. I made sure
Yeah,
it was
that's
as
right.
tight as could be. My email in college was SuperBrock53. I mean,
Oh,
I was
yeah.
all in, you guys.
Yeah.
I was all in, and I'm talking to Clem about this, and I'm like, man, like I got rooted in this identity that I was the hardest worker. I was the most athletic. I was the fastest. I was the one that like you couldn't throw anything in front of me. Resilient.
Yeah.
Okay. I was the most resilient human you've ever met.
Yeah.
And like I couldn't shut that voice down. And so I went all through my adult life with that mentality, that Superman mentality.
Mhm.
I can't show weakness. I can't do this. I can't do that. And it just led to a life of just discontent.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like I didn't feel any peace.
Yep.
And we're talking, and it was like 2:00 in the morning. And I'm like, God, I gotta get up. It's 5:36.
God's not giving me anything.
No, it's not. And we're talking about that, and I'm like, that's where I got to go with it.
Yeah.
Like, that's where I got to go. Because I think we're all searching for peace.
Yeah.
At some point in our life, we just think we can hit a certain like income level or a house or a car we drive, or like maybe it's what people think of us. Like we're just reaching for something.
Yeah.
And I was reaching for all the wrong stuff.
Yeah.
And so for 44 years, I'm reaching for all of it. And I would hit like this certain income level, and I'd be like, when I get there, I'm going to be happy.
Mm.
And I hit it, and it just moved up and up and up. And I just was left with this miserable feeling all the time, like someone's standing on my chest and like just got a size 12 boot on my chest all the time, and it never went away. And we're talking about that, and I was like, that's what I'm supposed to say. And so that's kind of where I went with it. And
Well, finish the thought. I think it'd be cool to like where you found breakthrough in that.
yeah, I mean, honestly, where I found breakthrough, like it all started with that conversation with Clem 2 years ago, like he brought something to me that was really hard to say out loud. And that led me to, I was like, wow, like I looked at him and I thought, I love you.
Yeah.
Like, and I told him, I said, dude, I love you. Like, you just told me that, like, I love you. And, oh, by the way, I'm a porn addict.
Yeah.
I've been hiding this from my wife for 8 years. She's caught me 4 times. We're in a miserable place right now, but I'm going about life like everything's peachy.
Right.
And that just began this relationship to, like, there's got to be more,
Yeah.
And it somehow led me to here, and all this stuff started. And I don't know if you mind me telling the story of how I knew about John Eldridge before Basecamp. It was just a God thing. I'd begin this process of like healing on my own, because I'm like, I'm tired of living the way I'm living. I run from my wife because I just want to. It was the best I could do to protect her. Okay, because I was taught to be a killer, and a killer, what does he do? He kills when he's challenged. And so me, when I was challenged, when conflict came around, I was never abusive. Don't get me wrong. I looked that in the camera straight off. Never touched her, but I could be really awful with words.
Yeah.
And I'm good at it. I can hurt you real quick with words because I had to be that when I was younger. And so me, to protect my wife, I ran from her.
Yeah.
And so for 20 years, I ran from her. When there was conflict, what did I do? I sank myself in work, and I convinced myself that it was for the good of my family.
Yeah.
You know, I sank myself in my kids because I never had that problem with my kids. I never felt inadequate with my kids. I don't know why. It just never did.
Yeah.
But I sank myself in my kids and in their activities and everything they had going on. And my wife, my poor wife, was just left over here like with no partner. And I couldn't get out of it. I didn't know how to have a conversation with her that wasn't comfortable. If there was an uncomfortable conversation to be had, I wanted to run because I knew what I was going to do. I had two emotions. It was happy and pissed off, and
nothing in between.
There just wasn't. I didn't know how any other feeling felt.
Yeah.
And so when I first started going through this process, it was like I'm listening to a podcast and I'm hearing a man named Eddie Penny. I mean, everybody knows who he is. The former Navy SEAL, just a bad dude. And he's on the Sean Ryan show, and he's talking about how he loses his temper. He gets drunk and he loses his temper, and he threatens to rip his fiance's face off. And she set the ring down and she said, I can't be with you. She said, if there's any chance for us to get together, you have to, several things you got to do, but one of them, you need to go to this retreat with my brother this weekend.
Yeah.
And they told him it was about like a bunch of men hanging out, having a campfire and shooting guns.
Yeah.
And that's what he thought it was. And he showed up and he's talking about this camp, and he didn't say True North.
Never did.
He doesn't say True North. He just says a camp. And then he goes into more depth about this book, this John Eldredge's Wild at Heart. And he's describing it, and I'm like, I'm desperate for something like that.
Yeah.
So I immediately got on Amazon. I ordered it. I ordered the audiobook. I'm listening to it. I'm reading it, and it's all falling into place. I'm hearing all these things, right? I'm finally hearing God talk to me. And one of those things where God was talking to me was he was leading me in the direction of this man, Clem, to get in contact with him for like a month straight. I'm like, this is just odd. Something's going on. We were friends, we were acquaintances, but I can't get his face out of my mind. It's in my heart. I can't leave it. And I try to touch base with him, and he says, hey, can we meet up tomorrow? And that's when it began. He told me a story, and it opened me up, and there began a relationship, and that relationship led to him trying to get some healing, and he was seeing a counselor, and the counselor said, you need to go to this retreat. He ended up at a retreat and calls me and says, this is the most life-changing experience I've ever had. You have to come over. I want to talk to you about it. And I come over and we sat down and we get 20 minutes into this. I said, man, this sounds like this book I've been reading. And he says, what's the book? And I said, John Eldredge's Wild at Heart. And his eyes just got huge. And he says, that's what it's over.
Yeah.
And this was Thursday, May 4th.
Yep.
And 2023. I remember the date.
And you literally locked in and signed up for camp.
I literally got on, and I had so much going on. I had commitments all weekend. And I called my brother. I was like, man, I need your help. Like, I've committed to all this, but God's telling me I got to go. And he said, whatever you got to do. And so he took my place with my son all day Saturday at an event I had volunteered for so I could be at this camp. And it just, the first camp was, I said in my response, it was like, I didn't get as much out of it as I thought I would because I was so overwhelmed. Because I'm a go-getter, right? You give me 10 topics, I'm fixing all 10.
Yeah.
And that's what
that weekend.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I did. I'm like, I got 3 days. I'm going to get 1 through 3 today. I'm going to, you know what I mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm going to get, by Sunday, I'm going to be cured.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I'm going to be cured.
Yeah.
And I got home and I was so super excited for days. And then I didn't fix anything.
Yeah.
And I was just back with the wolves again. And thank God, another one was a month away. And I went to another one 4 weeks down the road. And
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying, Brock, is a lot of times what happens at camp and happens in other areas, because your story is really powerful, because God will raise up the orphan inside of us
Mm-hmm.
to bring us into becoming a son, right?
Mhm.
And like even for Clem, like he was already preparing it. I mean, like I don't know if you guys heard Brock's story, but like there is no coincidence.
No.
Like if it's not God, what is it?
Yeah.
Right? And so like he's over here reading Wild at Heart, like this seems right, feels good, all these amazing things. And then a friend that he has a relationship with is like put on his heart for a month straight. And he's like, man, I just got to get with this guy. And then he reaches out and like, that is so God, right? Like
Yeah.
that's how he orchestrates
Yeah.
things. And I was actually at the camp with Eddie when he came.
were you really?
Yeah. So it was in Anadarko, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Sure was.
I remember
Yep.
that. And the cool part about that camp is we actually had Eddie there, and we had like I don't remember what they call it, an Army Ranger, right? So you had a SEAL and a Ranger, and that was back when we played paintball.
Oh,
like, bro,
I know who won that.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you right now, it was crazy. Like the last game come down to those two guys, and here's like the Army Ranger, he's on the ground, they both have shields, right? And they're here. And like, dude, he's here and he's got his gun pointed at Eddie, and Eddie's got his gun like pointed at him. And I'm just sitting back like, holy smokes. Like it was pretty awesome.
Because it's probably flipped for them.
oh yeah.
Like the
Well, but
goggles are probably, they're
what was
in kill
cool is
mode.
like they,
You know, they just destroyed everybody
yeah,
else.
they did. It was
Yeah.
like crazy. But man, I remember that. And I remember just him being there and like seeing a very strong, powerful man and being invited into a story, right? And so it changed the trajectory of who he is, right? I
Mhm.
mean, just like it did with every one of us, right?
Mhm.
And so his story is no different. It's just broadcast in
Yeah.
a bigger spotlight.
Mhm.
But what I love about that is like he's experiencing freedom from something that wasn't anything of his own, right?
No.
Like, man, True North is by far, it's not the only way, right?
Mhm.
But it is a very powerful way.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you get invited by someone and someone's on you to experience this, like, I mean, I'll go back to that camp, you'll know it by its fruit. What could be bad?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
what could be bad?
Yeah,
and
that's
it-
the truth.
You could go one time and it'd be like, man, holy smokes, like, I'm not sure I got what I needed and that type of stuff. That's okay. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's okay. Like, God will show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He'll get you to another camp if that's what's needed.
Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know,
You know, it's
So-
funny you say that. Like all the 8 of the guys I brought, I was so worried all week and all weekend, really. And my brother being the worst, because I'm with him every day,
Yeah.
all day. And his take has been like, when are you going to leave me alone about this?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And
When you come,
When you come.
Yeah.
And the
When you
only
finally say yes.
got him to come was because I went behind 3 of his or a couple of his best friends' backs and got their wives involved.
Yeah.
And so I was like, hey, by the way, your buddies are coming, so you're coming. Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
He was not happy about it. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm clearly not happy, and kind of an Eeyore about it.
Mm.
And within midday Friday, every one of them, the looks on their faces,
Yeah.
like the lightness about them.
Yeah.
And they were all like, this is not what I expected. Like, I don't know what I was expecting, but this is not it. This is so amazing.
Yeah.
And like, these are guys that aren't those kind of people. Like, these are like, this was so amazing. Like,
Yeah.
I'm coming back. When's the next one? You want to come? Yeah, we're coming. Let's all come.
Yeah.
And this started midday Friday.
Mhm.
So it took
Yeah.
less than 24 hours
Yeah.
Yeah.
to get complete buy-in, which was just beautiful.
well, what's cool is from the stage, you see it. Like
Yeah.
as a director, you see the camp and the way that it moves and flows. And
Thursday night's always like,
yeah.
Mhm.
And so you'll see the not togetherness, and then all of a sudden it starts getting tighter and tighter. And it's not like seats get closer, but they get closer.
They
Like,
did.
it's-
I watched it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I've often said that Friday's my favorite part of
Yeah.
camp. because it's that movement to where guys start connecting, light bulbs start coming on.
After the wound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
See, I still prefer Thursday because I actually like the fact that you see all these guys walking in and I'm just like, they have no idea what's about to happen to
The
them.
arrogance about them, huh?
Right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Or just the fear, right?
You know
too?
what?
Like,
That
it's
was my
like,
thought
dude,
Thursday.
You have no idea.
I kept thinking to myself, you guys have no clue. You have no clue.
Yeah.
Well, we had a lot of guys come by themselves, right? And like when a guy does that, like that is incredible, right?
Yeah,
And
it's huge.
we actually had a young man that was like 19 years old. Like he literally was trying to get his friends. He's been experiencing and coming to the frontier,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And so
credited
he's
you.
built community and that type of stuff, and tried to get him. They couldn't get off work and all that stuff. And he's like, I don't care, I'm going. And man, like God highlighted him so many times, just like his joy in what he has, like as a young man. And man, there was times when he was walking in front of me, and I was like, you know, I love my story and I love what God has done in my life, and I truly wouldn't change anything.
Yeah.
But if I had to change one thing, it would be I would have went to a camp a lot longer before I did.
Yeah, same thing. So I want to talk about him because like he gave me so much hope. So my daughter's 16 and her standards are through the roof. and it's a beautiful thing because daughters, they create their list of standards by their fathers.
Yeah.
And it makes my heart so happy that her standards are so high that hardly nobody can meet them. It's the most beautiful thing in the world. And lately she's been getting down because like all these other girls are finding these relationships and this and that. And I'm like, you know, you've got to be patient. Like God's got somebody for you. And she's like, oh, all the good ones are going to be gone. You know how 16-year-old girls are.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm at this camp this weekend, and
So
it was
good.
not just him,
Dude.
but there were two other young kids, and they were so on fire for God.
Yeah.
And they were talking about just like how much they valued their virginity and like how much they prayed to God for like the right woman, and how they were trying to get themselves in the right place to find the right woman God had for them. And that just oh, my heart melted. I came home and I had to tell my daughter that when I got home. I was like, there's hope.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's people out there.
Yeah.
Hang in there.
And I want to speak on this because in a lot of the stuff, the content I consume, and a lot of like just the pulse on the church as a whole, like something that we as our generations, the older generations that are now leading within the churches and ministries, we need to get on board and have some awareness that that young man, 19 years old, stepped into that weekend ready to step into whatever God had for him, but he was not ready for any BS.
Nope.
Like there was no BS within him,
Right.
and he would have sensed it coming from any of us. And so I'm kind of fired up right now about like, hey, churches, ministry leaders, like there's a lot of research being done that this generation that's coming up right now, that's coming into adulthood, they don't want the fake. They can smell it out. They can smell out your shallow stories or your surface level answers. They don't want any of that. Yeah. And so, luckily, True Norse culture is like we don't struggle with it too much, right? Like we love to go deep and be real and authentic. But I'm really excited to see this next generation start coming in with us and partnering with us and seeing the difference it's going to make for these men that are now going to have the experience of before they hit these life storms that all of us have experienced so deeply. Like they're going to have this experience to hold on to.
Yeah. And there's no promise that it's going to be any easier than ours, but I know you're on something because I just got the Holy Spirit bumps for a minute.
Yeah, man.
And I do think you're exactly right, James. Like those kids want authenticity, right? They don't want fakeness, and they're willing to. And our thought process is, well, maybe they can't handle it. No, they can handle it, right? Yeah. And so it's really, really cool that you're noticing that. Yeah. And I mean, I hope, right, that if people are watching and you lead in any type of ministry, or you're serving with a football team, or you're a coach, or whatever you are, like, man, people want authenticity. They want truth, you know? Yeah. And when I got up on the stage and shared that, it was like to say, like, I know God the Father, but I don't know if I know God as the Father. Like Heath came up to me later, one of the guys that actually responded to, and he's like, look, I want to thank you. Yeah. Because there's a lot of guys that would be in your position or shoes that and I'm not saying I have some high level of whatever, but I do have a voice, and I think people listen to it because of the experiences I've had and the impact I've made in and throughout True North. And he's like, that is one of the things I right now with churches and people that have these people's ears, they're not being authentic with where their struggles are or where their unbeliefs are. And by doing that, he's like, you just unlock something inside of me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it's incredible.
Yeah.
So good.
Same thing happened for me, just going up to the bonfire and just like, yeah, of course I have agreements. Like,
Right.
it's stuff I've broken before. Some of them were new.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were like, I haven't made agreement with them, but I'm going to get rid of these lies that are trying to come into my mind. And same thing, guys came up like, dude, like, I just love the authenticity of this weekend and like the leadership that steps into that. And we had a funny moment last year. This is going back to like the age thing where we're going to our last camp and we're kind of doing inventory and we're like, oh, dude, we are out of medium shirts. And it's like, what's going on? Like, we use this algorithm, like we've got all the stats and everything of like what percentage of shirts to order, and our mediums were just wiped out. And it's like, oh yeah, we've got a lot more young guys coming that they hadn't gotten that dad weight yet.
I know it's not me because I graduated to a large. So,
you got a large now?
Bro, and that was really hard for me to do, to be honest, if I'm not gonna lie. Like, to go to a large, I was like, I'm not a large. I was like, no, you're a large, man. You need a large shirt.
That was my feeling when I went to XL.
Yeah.
But you're right.
These
like,
young guys, dude, it's happening. And like churchly, like anyone listening to this, like this isn't like, ooh, I need to find all the dads in my life to send them to this. Like, man, 18 and older, it's time.
Well, last thing I checked is no matter if you're born and walking this earth, you're a son. Hands down. Right.
Or daughter.
So, or daughter. Thank you. But our ministry's focused on sons.
Yeah.
So you're right. And I have an amazing father I have an amazing daughter. And what you just said, Brock, like, sidestep that. But that is like knowing that you can raise the standards up in your daughter and she sees you and then she wants something like that, but you want even more for her is, dude, way to go, man. And I'm sure that wasn't her idea. Right. And so that's really cool. But back to what you were saying, like, I think like right now in this ministry, dude, there was a guy there that was super old, right? Like, we have it on all walks, but if you want to get your sons involved in something, like, man, an invitation, right? Like, you can buy them a lot of things, but a ticket to True North Ministry Basecamp would be really cool.
Yeah. I brought mine in September. It was amazing.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think we hear so many times, and even for myself, it's like, man, if I had this at the age of 19 or 20, even, like, it would have made such a huge difference.
Well, and it's not that it's going to be easy.
It's not that it's easy, but you have a foundation that is being built so that when life storms come, you know your identity in Christ, and you can trust and walk. You just walk completely differently.
Well, you have an ability to recognize stuff too.
Yeah. You
like
don't have as many questions, right? Or at least you know you can go to the Father with your questions, and that's probably the biggest difference, right?
Well,
because when life gets tough and you're not anchored, like you're just flailing about. You're just trying to survive, and you lose.
I think John says situational awareness, right? Like, you have situational awareness. Like, your eyes have been open.
Yeah.
You understand you're part of a larger story.
Yeah.
And because you're part of a larger story, there's always going to be these things that are part of story. And know that when it comes against you, because you are a warrior and you are a true gifted leader underneath a really high king, like, you can step into that and it's okay, right? You don't have to pull away from it. You can step into it. And it's not with brawn and, like, pick
yourself up by the bootstraps.
Right.
It's not that.
It's not that. It's the, wait a minute, like, man, I think I need to spend some time here, or I need to go after mentorship in this area, or ask wise counsel, right? Like, they learn those things, and that's what helps them in and through the storms, because they're going to come, and they're going to come, and they're going to come, and they're going to come. But they have a narrative and they have a language that is completely different than what, one, a church gives you, and two, what the world serves up.
And Eldridge this year so far in his podcast has really been leaning hard on maturity. And he defined maturity. This might not be the exact words he used, but it's basically having a realistic view of what's happening in the world. That's spiritual maturity, is understanding the balance of what's happening in the kingdom and what's happening on this earth and where they're intersecting.
Yeah.
The more you understand what's actually happening, that's your maturity level.
Yeah.
And so there's no better orientation or briefing than what happens at Basecamp. Not for a weekend.
Nope.
Like you would have to go through seasons and seasons of stuff to get this type of orientation to what's actually going on. And so it doesn't matter if you're 19. There's these 19-year-olds that honestly can step into this, have an impact from what is taught, and have this situational awareness, and their spiritual maturity now is that of a 40 or 50 year. Like there's honestly many 40 and 50 year olds that have the spiritual maturity of a teenager.
Yeah.
You know?
Fact.
And I think as a man walking through counseling, like if you want to accelerate towards healing and you want to accelerate towards where God really wants you, and not maybe have as many, I don't know if you want to call it events or whatever it is, but areas where the enemy can come in and seek destruction and kind of re-roll things back. So you have all this, it's kind of like a porn addiction, right? It's like, I'm going to do it myself. I'm holding on tight to it. But when you bring someone into that story, all of a sudden it's not me doing it by myself. Right. And so I think what happens in that is if men are willing to do that, like, bro, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you want to save yourself about 6 months of counseling,
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
It's
knock it out in a weekend.
It's 9-12 months of counseling in 3 days. It really
why,
is.
why
It's
do you
crazy.
think
a lot
so many
cheaper.
counselor
Yeah, it is.
partners
Yeah.
like send people to us? I mean, I have some really good friends and I won't mention their names, but like one of their prerequisites to be counseled by them is to go to a base camp. There's no questions. I don't care if I'm counseling in marriage. I don't care if I'm counseling individually. You have to attend a camp.
Yeah.
Because what they tell me is that things that are unlocked in that camp are like literally 18, 24 to 36 months worth of counseling is what I get told. It's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible.
That's wild.
I love that. That's so cool. Man, this camp was actually really good for me too. I realized I think it's been almost 2 years since I've just sat through a base camp as an attender. And even back then, if I can think back to that one, like I was much more operational mindset. I'm so into environments and
You are.
bringing more efficiency and excellence. Like I love it. Like I'm called to create environments
You
where
are.
men can hear from God.
You are.
So I'm obviously passionate about that. But the downside is everywhere I go, I'm looking around like, okay. I'm just like either judging or thinking of what could be better, all that stuff. And even my last base camp that I actually stayed all weekend, I was the director for. And so that's a whole different experience. But this weekend, it was interesting just completely settling in. I helped on Thursday set up and helped on Sunday to tear down. But in between, it's just kind of like I had a lot of stuff I just wanted to walk with God in. And, about 5 to 10% of it had to do with the content. It was all beautiful foundation for me to then go and have time with God. But man, my encouragement would be to you guys that either have only been serving with True North, or maybe you've only been to a camp or two and you're like, I think I got everything. Like, dudes, like this is, I don't know what number of camp this is, including all the advanced ones that I sit through and even the Eldridge camps that we've been to. Like, I've been to plenty, right? And God had this was the most notes I've ever taken during a camp, and the most healing I've ever had, the most direction on just different things. And so my encouragement is consider what your next step is if you're listening to this and you're like, maybe there is more to what I need, because obviously I completely live in this message.
Yeah.
I told my wife, you're not supposed to text, right? But I text her Thursday night and I was like, I could probably sit and repeat that whole session, the first session verbatim. Like I know it by heart. And yet it's crazy how much in my daily life I can just forget all of it or not live out of it. And so that was, oh man, there's just so much encouragement and excitement and childlike faith of like, God, you are so good to keep our experience is so fresh and like there's just no end to it.
Yeah, I feel like God's telling me to say, like, man, there are men on this podcast that have listened, and that's your life, right? Like, man, I do my downloads, I listen to my Bible, or I read my Bible, I listen to podcast, and but then I get disengaged from that message, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I think the Father wants and desires such deep intimacy with every one of us
Mm-hmm.
that he'll call that orphan up, right? And I think even for you, James, like throughout that weekend, like the content was phenomenal, but it was the opportunity and you being obedient to do that. And then removing the distractions to say yes to that, right? Even as a guy that's been to Basecamp umpteen times, right?
Yeah.
Like you receiving something, it's available for everybody.
Yeah.
And so that was what even God said on the way down there was like, speak to the 2-timers, speak to the 4-timers, right?
Yeah.
And so if there's a man that's like, I haven't been in a while, like, man, come.
Yeah.
We would love to have you.
Yeah.
Because honestly, even some of the information that's being shared has been updated, right? And I think getting better at environments have been updated. And so, man, that would encourage anyone that's listening to this message and you feel like just this desire or anxiousness, or you're like, it's exciting. But then you let that fear sit in, just, man, know that that's not from your Father,
Yeah.
but that excitement is. And so it'd be great to connect with someone and find a way to engage in the next camp that's coming up.
Yeah. And I'd also say, if you're not creating margin to have a weekend of disconnected and from the world and intimacy with your Father, like an environment where you can go and hear from God, whether that's a true North environment or not. If you're not doing that at least once a year, I believe you're mishandling your discipleship.
You are.
Because and like I said, it's not all about True North. Like obviously, I think a True North retreat a year does handle that for you. Like that checks the box. Like you can go and come and we'll take care of you and you don't have to worry about food, all that stuff. But I don't want to also disqualify, like if you guys that go to a mountain trip and spend 4 days, like that's fantastic, phenomenal.
Well, we tell men all the time, right? Like you can, just because you're at camp and you're experiencing this doesn't mean you can't have it wherever you are.
Yeah.
Right. Like nature and beauty, like even, I mean, this is what camp did. Like when it was really warm this week, right, in Oklahoma, and then it decided to be 40, but it was like 82 degrees on Monday.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I did? I was like, you know what? Instead of just going to lunch, I'm going to go on a walk. Right. Yeah. And I submersed myself into trees, into grass, into noise, into sound and birds. And like I was taken back to moments at camp. Right. Like, and I think we talk to men about those anchoring moments that you have and being able to pull those out when you need them. But like God was just ministering to my heart of like, son, you can have this anytime you want.
Yeah.
Like anytime, no matter what. You can even do it if you close your eyes, right? And so we forget that because the world consumes and wants so much from us. And then by the end of the day, we don't have anything to give.
Yeah. That's a really good challenge because we can have that experience at camp, but then taking it back to our life, often our life doesn't support the new information that we got or the breakthroughs that we got, but it doesn't support that intimacy because of all the busyness, and like literally everything in this world is designed to distract us from walking in unity with God. And so it's a challenge and a good one to make is like create your environment, create your schedule and life to support what happens in an environment like camp, like going to the mountain. And that's a one-time deal, but how can we do that daily to create a little bit of space to walk in unity with God so that we can experience what we experience at camp? Because that's really, the content's great. Yeah. And it's awesome information and orientation and tools beyond your imagination, but where the rubber meets the road is the quiet time and seeking God and going to Him. And anyway, so yeah, it's so good. Yeah, I love that you said that.
Yeah. You guys got anything else about this weekend you feel led to share?
Hey, if you're a listener and man, you're off in some other place that's far away from Oklahoma, but you feel like this message is truly something that you want to dive deeper into. I'll tell you, like, there was a guy that came from New York, and literally he raised money to get here because he believed that God was prompting his heart to get here. And, he went to people and said, this is what I believe and this is what I have a desire for. And people stepped up and paid his way. And so first and foremost, man, I don't know who you guys are, and I'm sure you'll never hear this message, but I want to thank you for investing in him, because what he received this weekend was freedom.
Yeah.
And that's not something you get very often.
Yeah.
But if you're listening and you're like, man, I'm all the way in XYZ, I don't know, name it wherever you are. Like, don't let that be something that prevents you from experiencing this, because he came and like, he is blown away by the message that he received.
Yeah.
And, I love it. And I think, that's a distraction that can come in and tell you that, well, but you live in XYZ, there's no way to get there.
Yeah.
No, like, and maybe it's a money thing. Well, man, don't be afraid to ask people, because there's people out there that God will prepare and he will provide.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, logistically, from our standpoint, if you contact us beforehand, all you got to do is get to Oklahoma City Airport, right? Like, like we have so many men that would be honored to pick you up,
right.
or house you if you have to come in the day before, and pick you up and take you to camp, and provide a chair for you and provide sleeping bag for you, like all that stuff. Like, don't let any of that stuff get in your way. Yeah. OKC Airport, not Dallas. I don't know if we might not drive to Dallas.
You don't know if you're into it that much.
Brockwood, if the Lord
Brock's
told him,
not that helpful.
Yeah, he would jump in his truck and he'd be gone. Yeah. He'd go get you.
Yeah.
So
you just volunteered me to drive to Dallas. I don't like that.
Thanks for bringing that up. That's really good stuff. I'm really excited. I mean, it's just incredible. We've been doing this for so long, but yet it's just starting, right? Like there's so much more to be done and to see and witness, and Jesus keeps proving that he is so into this, right? And so I thank you guys, Mike, like you were literally the director at my very first base camp.
Yeah.
So you're very old and wise, and I appreciate that about you, that you're still able to roll out of bed and come to camp.
Yeah.
But
I may go to sleep a little early these days. In my old camps, I'd stay up till 1 or 2. Yeah. I learned real quick that Jesus does not want that for me. Yep. So I like sneak away and I get in bed.
Jesus didn't want it for me either, but I still did it.
Yeah. That's awesome. But Mike, man, you've been such an inspiration, an incredible guy to lean on. You've been there for me and Ryan through so many personal things, and absolutely love you for that. And you'll be directing the summit in October.
I am.
And so any of you guys that have been to camp, like, and you haven't been to summit, like, come on, like, we'll have a fun time that weekend. And then Brock, man, you have been to almost every camp we've had the past 2 years. 2 years. And it's been really fun getting to know you and your passion. It's like, I love guys that we have to yank the leash back a little bit. Like it's a lot easier than kicking them out the door, right? Like, but Brock is like, hey, let's go. Yeah. Love that, Brock. Love your heart. I love seeing the men that, you went out and got and brought in to this message, and their lives are going to be forever changed because of your obedience in that.
And Brock, I'll say, I was at a camp with you last time, and the things that you're walking in and through were like some of the toughest things that you'll ever walk through as a man, right? Being able to die to yourself, right? And being able to step into that husband and not be afraid to have conversations of intimacy and be authentic of where you are. I mean, I can learn so much from you, and I want you to know that, that I really can. And where you came in this camp, I was just like, God, like, okay, can you download whatever you gave him and give it to me?
What was great about this camp was this is the first one I've came to in 2 years where my life is awesome. You know what I mean? Like marriage is awesome. Like everything's just awesome. Like it just feels freeing. And so it was nice coming into a weekend to be able to just like focus on whatever God wants me to do, like whatever questions I need to answer, whatever guidance I need to give, however I need to listen. Like I'm not clouded with all the
Yep.
crap in
Yeah.
my life, and it was just really nice to just be able to do that. So it was really enjoyable.
Yeah.
So,
Well, thank you guys for who you are
knock on wood. I don't want.
Yeah.
and all the incredible stuff
Yeah.
y'all do.
I don't think it's real wood. So
I don't think
No,
so
we're
either.
good. We're good.
Find something
There's
else.
nothing real in this room right now. We're such hypocrites.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But man, love you guys.
Yep,
Thank
love
you for
you.
joining us today, and we'll continue doing ministry together for a while.
Yep.
Let's do it.